Yes, Mr. Chairman, you're live.
Okay, committee will come to order. Just this first meeting of the year, a few remarks on how we do things. For people that are participating here, want to testify, just a few suggestions. We do try to keep a proper decorum, be civil, be polite, come through, address the chair, and do wait to be recognized. And when you come up, be prepared to give us your name, tell us who you are. And my advice to anybody who wants to testify to a committee is be brief. You're more effective if you're brief, and be blunt. I've seen people who go all over the map without saying what they really believe and expect us to understand, get the general drift, and that is not very effective. Be blunt. That helps, and be brief, and be prepared to answer any questions. And what I'll tend to do in calling on people, if we have a sponsored bill, the sponsor will lead off. Committee bills, we probably won't give a great introduction. We've seen those before. We'll ask state agencies involved that are present to testify first. And then my instinct is to throw it open and say, who wants to be next? So be prepared. And those of you who attend regularly, that I tend to know what you've got to offer. I have been known to call on people who don't volunteer. So be a little prepared. I don't do that all the time, but it has happened. I will, one thing I do that's a little different, particularly with technical amendments, I will be perfectly happy to take amendments before we move the bill on occasion. Somebody suggests something I think we might forget about, or it's quicker to dispose of it right on the spot. We have done that. And another policy I have is that we don't get a final decision on this bill unless I've got 3 votes, one way or the other. I will hold things open if members are absent, and that happens because people have to go testify in other committees. And I don't think it's fair to have a bill disposed of based on who's present and who's not. So I will hold if we get a close vote, I will hold it open for that reason. And I will go to the people who are online last, and if we get in a real time jam, there might be a problem over that. I will try to adjourn the committee. We aren't as close to the chamber as we used to be. I will try to adjourn the committee about 15 minutes before we're due upstairs. We need that amount of time to be prepared to answer the roll call up there. So with that, the first bill for our consideration is Senate File 9, Parental Rights in Education. It's a joint committee bill. What it deals with is trying to ensure that the parents are treated properly. We're teaching their children, and they're primarily the ones responsible for their children. It tries to reinforce the parental rights. We dealt with this bill last year. It had a second component relating to gender education that we decided was outside our charge from the Management Council. And so we just stuck with the parental rights portion. And that's what's in the bill. Will, the bill itself is really devoted to strengthening the parental rights. With that, State Department of Education, do you all have any comments on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just here to address you and express support for both the bills before you today. First off, with parental rights, appreciate you looking into this topic. It's something I believe a lot in, that parents have a constitutional and fundamental right to direct the education of their children. And so appreciate these efforts. I would offer today some slight amendments for your consideration, just regarding timelines, to tighten it up a bit and to, I believe, strengthen the bill a bit and make it less ambiguous in terms of those dates. And so the two are on page 2, the first, line 8. And would suggest that after the words "as soon as practicable," insert language, something to the effect of "but no later than 20 days," just to provide, again, some guardrails with days there and better define practicable. The second is also on page 2, line 23. And that would be after the words "in a reasonable time," and would suggest something to the effect of "but no later than 10 days of the request." Again, just eliminating some ambiguity with those timeframes. I would leave it to the committee. I think that the important thing for me is to make sure that there's defined days to be able to adhere to.
Those of you who are going to testify on the bill coming on, those are amendments we will consider. If you want to comment on them, feel free to when you come up.
The last comment I would make is just on page 3, lines 2 through 8. Seem slightly redundant, just considering that on the prior page we are requiring notification, and so I'm not sure if there's a need to prohibit policies that don't allow for notification. But in any case, that's the prerogative, I believe, of this committee. And so we'll keep those comments very brief. I think there's a lot of work still to be done on parental rights, and we'll continue to look at other areas. But I think that this is great, and I appreciate the committee's work. And Mr. Chairman, if you'd allow me the latitude to just say a couple of words about your next bill before I leave the committee.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to also express support for the bill regarding our developmental preschools. These are not daycares. This is not traditional childcare. What this is really about is providing for those students with disabilities at that early level. And this is a need, one that we've supported. And I would just express support for an external cost adjustment, whether it is here or through the Department of Health's budget. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we would stand for any questions.
Okay, committee, any questions for the state superintendent? Let me ask one, actually on the second bill, while we've got you here. Has the department done any analysis of the effect of what goes on in child development centers on saving us money in special education in the K-12 system? Because I think there is an effect, and I don't know what it actually is, because they're dealing with kids at an earlier age where it's easier to fix, and some other factors too.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, and there's been much study related to that. During my term, we have not performed an analysis of that, but happy to provide you any resources that we have to that effect, because I believe that that's intent for me, how we save dollars in the K-12 arena, especially when we have 100% reimbursement for special education in K-12. How do we make sure that we mitigate that and be as effective and as conservative as possible there?
Okay. Does that understand, Mitch?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Superintendent. I just had a question on, if you know the answer, on page 2. it would be line 10, the safe and supportive learning environment. And I know that sounds really good to all of us, but as I was just looking through the bill last night, that is connected, well, the CDC basically has a program like that under their mental health area that talks a lot about sex education, sexual health education in the classroom, and some other things like that. And so I was wondering, is this just a term we're using, or does it link back to that program?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'm not sure exactly what that is defined as, and so we can absolutely get that to you, because that would be something that I would want to know myself, so.
Thank you very much, and we'll connect with you on that later on.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Who wants to be next in this? Committee? Yes, ma'am.
Senator, excuse me, Senators, my name is Janet Farmer. I am a school nurse here in Cheyenne with the district here in Cheyenne, although I'm not representing them today. I am also past president of the Wyoming School Nurses Association, and I am currently the Wyoming director to the National Association of School Nurses. I want to point out just a couple things that maybe need to be clarified in this bill, and then one area of significant concern that we would have. The first one is on page 2, paragraph 2, where it's talking about not prohibiting parents or guardians access to their student education records. That is actually specifically spelled out in the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, the federal law which governs public schools. So it's a bit redundant to have here, although certainly it's certainly not inappropriate. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that it's actually already a process for public schools that they have to provide that.
And,
Yes, sir.
excuse me, let me ask you a question. That's a federal.
Federal, yes.
So this is
is
having
state.
the state reinforce that federal.
Yes, sir, Chairman Scott.
Interrupt.
A quick question on that point, and one of the concerns that I have with this draft is that it specifically talks about parents or guardians, and it doesn't talk about custodial parents. It doesn't talk about any situation related to if both parents actually have rights to access. I assume that the federal act probably goes into great detail about which parent and under what circumstances a parent would have those rights. Is that accurate?
Chairman Scott, Senator Rothfuss, I'm not an expert on FERPA. My understanding that any custodial parent has access to educational records, whether they have physical custody or not. But again, I'm not an expert on the exact language.
Thank you.
The second point that I would like to point out, or just maybe ask for some clarification on page 4, paragraph C, talks about well-being questionnaires or health screenings. I can't speak to well-being questionnaires. I do know school.
Tell us where on page 4 you are.
Oh, I'm sorry, paragraph C, line 6. I can speak to school nurses do a variety of well-being screenings, vision and hearing being the largest ones. And again, I can speak to my district. We do put that information in our student handbook at the beginning of the year that those screenings will be done. Parents do check during registration that they have read that handbook. I just would like to clarify that that is sufficient as proposed to this language, or does there need to be more notification that the senators are looking for in this particular area? Vision and hearing screenings, scoliosis screenings, height and weight screenings are something that are done by school nurses, by PE teachers on a regular basis, just for monitoring. We do catch a lot of students with vision and hearing anomalies that we can then monitor and suggest or provide services for. So I would be very hesitant to see those go away because they do provide a very significant services for some of our students in the districts. The biggest issue that I want to address with you all today is on page 3. It's paragraph B, starting with line 16. This paragraph talks about providing a list of health services to parents for all services provided in the schools. I would say that that would be a very difficult task at best, an almost insurmountable one at worst. I have nurses across, I know of nurses across the district and in this district. They regularly, on a daily basis, see 40 kids per day. On a busy day, it might be 80. To list every one of those services provided would be very, very, very difficult. You could define things like first aid or emergency treatment. In this district, we do have a statement in our online registration that says a parent consents to emergency treatment. We have parents who have declined that, and then we need to go back to those parents to say, I need to make sure that you understand what this means. If you decline emergency services through the school, I can't see your student at all. I can't provide any services to your student. My concern with putting language in that says first aid or emergency treatment and trying to umbrella those terms, your definition of first aid might be different than mine as a nurse. So it would be very difficult. And again, it would have to be very specifically defined. And I think that that would be very difficult. We have, yes, sir.
Again, where are you in the bill?
Page 3, paragraph B as in boy, line 16, that whole paragraph. Just an example, if you were to say first aid treatment, certainly that could be anything from a scraped knee to a concussion, to a broken bone, to a panic attack. And all those are all things that we see in the schools. We do tube feedings, we do catheters, there are students across the state that are in school with ventilators. Those are all chronic care kind of treatments that are provided. We have students with, and I think that you probably are aware of this, with diabetes, with EpiPens, with significant allergies, with seizures. All of those are treated in schools. Yes.
Thank you. So for the first aid example, what do you do in a circumstance where you've got an 8-year-old on the playground and the parent has refused and they fall off and they hit their head? What happens next?
Chairman Scott, Senator Rothfuss, that's a very, very difficult question. If this were to pass, a school nurse would not be able to provide that treatment without calling the parent first. As a nurse, I would probably treat them first. And then I'm in a very liable situation of putting my nursing license, which guides my practice, on the line because I didn't follow this law to the letter.
So, Mr. Chairman, a follow-up then on that. So as a healthcare provider, you have an obligation to basically protect the health of this individual that is injured on the playground, maybe even critically injured. You have that obligation, but at the same time, if this were to pass, your job would be at risk. And so what you'd probably do is go with your motivation to protect their health, and then you just get fired.
Chairman Scott, Senator Rothfuss, I would agree. Yes,
Probably
I would
a good
say
approach.
Yes. My duty is to provide immediate care. If I don't have permission to do that, I would provide immediate care.
Okay, thank you.
So again, I don't know that you can define these things, even beyond first aid. Say you have a student with a wound that's 2 or 3 days old, it's healing, it's fine, but they want a cover on it. They want a Band-Aid or they want a cover on it. But I don't have permission for that. Right now, I'd say to this young person who had a scraped knee, yes, you can have a Band-Aid, or no, I can't give you a Band-Aid because I don't have permission. It doesn't fall under this. But I have a student over here who wants a cover for a wound that's maybe for a self-induced, a cutting or a suicide attempt. I can't provide that either, but it would benefit that student significantly in the environment of education to provide that service. But if I don't have that permission, if that particular service is not listed on this list that we have provided to parents, I can't provide that. I would stand for any other questions.
Senator Steinmetz.
What liability do you think exists to hand a child a Band-Aid?
Chairman Scott, Senator Steinmetz, it would be in this language. It's not if it's not listed specifically, because this language said all health services, then I would be violating that law by not including it in the law. And so if I don't have parent permission for that, I can't give it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Wow, that's pretty deep. Words have common definitions. First aid is first aid. You look it up, it's pretty obvious what first aid is. You're getting kind of off in the weeds here. Look, we could define every single word in our statutes, and our statute books would fill this entire room, but common sense kind of carries the day here. So I would just slightly push back on the have to list every single service. First aid is first aid. It's defined by OSHA. If we want to include that definition, we can do that. But if we start going down that road, like I said, our green books will fill this entire room up if we start parsing out every word and changing definitions. So thank you.
Thanks, but on that point to Senator Beitman, the common sense rules the day here is probably my response to the bill. I think that this is a bill that I don't even see what it addresses, if not exactly what was described. Either we want total control as parents over everything that happens, or we have faith that the right choice is going to be made by professionals such as Ms. Farmer here. And I think that's the tension that comes through in that presentation. Either we mean this law in the B paragraph that we want permission for everything or the right to opt out of everything, and we want the implications of that, and we want to fill the green book with this, or we don't. And honestly, that's been my concern all along, is the fact that it creates this confusion. And while hopefully many nurses and healthcare providers at schools would make the same choice and just say, all right, I'm using my common sense, I'm not going with the green book. When you're hoping that everybody will just ignore your law so that a good outcome can take place, you probably shouldn't pass that law.
Should we put in an explicit exception for first aid and emergency care and put it right in this paragraph so that we don't have this confusion? Is that something we ought to do?
Mr. Chairman, I think if you read paragraph B in its complete entirety here, it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't really think we need to go into this any deeper than that. I mean, look, Maybe I haven't had enough coffee and I'm not following all these black helicopters, but I can read, and this is pretty plain language. I don't see that it needs to be any more specific than this.
Okay. Committee, anything else? Thank you very much. Who wants to be next?
Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of issues that I would make suggestions on. If you would go to page 3, if you would go to line 11, it talks about not adopt or implement any rule, policy, or procedures that encourage or have the effect of encouraging. And I really struggle with the or have effect of encouraging. I'm not sure we can work with that, so would suggest that that be amended out. And then again, the idea of emergencies or standard first aid is something that I have an issue with. So if you look at section B, I would suggest that on line 17, that we strike at the beginning of the year. And then on line 22 at the end, we insert prior to initiating the service. And then on page 19, to help with some of the ambiguousness of emergencies, after guardians, any, insert routine. So it's a guardian, so the section B then would read effective school year 2025 and school years thereafter, each school district shall make available to parents and guardians any routine health care services provided or offered or provided at the student's school, and provided the option for the parent or guardian to withhold consent or decline any specific health care service prior to initiating the service. I think trying to have it the first day of school when you don't know 9 months later what's going to happen is difficult for most schools to do. And I will tell you that if you're in one of the larger schools in our state, you're probably going to have at least one emergency or 2 emergencies every single day where something's happening to some student, a broken arm, concussion. We've had, it's pretty amazing some of the different things that happen. And then some of our fragile students that have some severe healthcare problems and the things that they have to have taken care of them on a routine basis are pretty amazing. Even some of the feeding tubes and cleaning the feeding tubes and those different things like that. With that, I'd answer questions.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Kind of the same question in your experience with some of those larger schools. If you had a circumstance where this statute were in place and the parent had directly withheld consent on, we'll say, treatment of first aid or something along those lines, if that's one of the services you provide and a parent withheld that service, what do you do in that circumstance if you have a child that, falls down, hits their head, unconscious on the ground? What's the action that's taken?
Well, I think it puts you in a difficult situation where you have to make that decision. Am I going to help the student and try to take care of them, which, again, I would do that. I know that most of the nurses that I've worked with in the 3 districts that I've worked in would take care of the student first and worry about themselves later. But it does give them a position that they have to make a choice there, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, a follow-up on that, a little different on the mental health side of things. Let's say you have a student that's severely depressed and wants to speak with a counselor, but there's an explicit no speaking to counselors on that form. So it's not an emergent situation, but still you even sense, your teachers will see that something is clearly wrong. This is in place. There's an explicit prohibition by the parent of having counselors engage with that student. What happens next?
Again, I think you would have to make a decision based on the specific situation. In all those situations, we try to get a hold of the parent as quickly as possible and see if we can get something going on there. If it were a suicidal issue, I would probably get a hold of either emergency services to take the student in, or get a hold of law enforcement to have them take that student in if it was a situation where they were threatening harm to themselves or someone else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator Brennan.
I have a question on the adding the,
Magnetic personality.
better?
Mine's working.
All right,
Yes.
thank you. If we add in this language prior to initiating the services, I'm just worried that that will do exactly what we're talking about not happening, which is that you couldn't provide first aid services and then call a parent. And, you know, as a nurse myself, I know sometimes we have to provide the first aid, then notify the parents. I think that that is doable in this section B, but I think if we add this prior to initiating this service, that would then create exactly the problem that we're trying to avoid. I don't know, thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I guess my thought would be that if we put routine in the front of that it would be the things that they do on a routine basis, which would be the screenings for scoliosis, the hearing screenings, some of those things. I still think that there needs to be the ability for people to take care of any type of emergency or first aid situation that needs to be there. So my thought was that if we had routine in front of healthcare, that may change where we're at with everything. I don't see an emergency situation being routine. I guess that's me looking at it from my side, so I was just offering suggestions there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Mr. Chairman, I really hadn't planned to say anything, but in light of some of the discussion, wanted to be sure that the committee was aware of a couple of things. Earlier, there was reference made to FERPA, the Family Education Rights Privacy Act. That is, of course, federal law governing student records, student information. The section in the federal code that immediately follows that, 20 U.S. Code 1232H, FERPA is 1232G, so 1232H is known as the Protection of Pupil Rights Act, the Protection of Pupil Rights Act. So federal law, Mr. Chairman, already requires parental notification in these instances. Activities involving the collection, disclosure, or use of personal information collected from students. So when we're collecting their information, we need to, their personal information, we need to be sure that parents are advised of that. When there's an administration of a survey, when we're going to ask questions of the student, then there is the requirement that parents are notified of that. And now when we get to the issue of emergencies and things like that, here's how the federal law deals with it. It says any non-emergency invasive physical examination or screening that is required as a condition of attendance or administered by the school and scheduled by the school in advance and not necessary to protect the immediate health and safety of the student or of other students. So it's really excluding those non-emergency, or it is excluding emergency situations. So the federal law says that if it's sort of a routine thing, the scoliosis examination, the hearing test, the vision test, those are things that you're required to provide notice. But if it is something that is to protect the immediate health and safety of the student or other students, then it does not require disclosure. So that's just the federal law, and I wanted to be sure that the committee was aware of that, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Farmer, I was wondering if you had any insight into the custodial versus non-custodial parent aspect of that, who is going to be giving permission in those types of circumstances and how that would play out. This draft doesn't really go into that. I'm concerned about a situation where you have two split parents effectively, and they both would end up having the capacity, I guess, to opt in or opt out. I'm not entirely sure how that would play out, but is that something that you see as taken care of in the federal law?
Mr. Chairman, federal law does not address the question of the custodial nature of a parent. So federal law really talks about parents. The only one exception you'll find in FERPA is language that if the parent has been charged with the abuse or neglect of a child. So that's the instance when the parent sort of has their right carved out. The issue of custodial rights and parents' ability to access information then unfortunately becomes subject of decrees. So it's a case-by-case individualized basis of whether or not a judge has allocated or provided that right to each parent. So typically, and this is an overgeneralization, typically a court will award a joint legal custody. That joint legal custody means that both the custodial and non-custodial parent would have right to access that information. If the court went further in describing the right of the parent, then that would be the case. So schools do get into this business of interpreting decrees and trying to determine what the rights of specific parents in those situations are, but it is not simple and straightforward.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Different question, if I can. Mr. Farmer, so you lay out these FERPA requirements for screeners and a lot of the things that are addressed in here. Is it your understanding that our 48 districts of the state have implemented policies consistent with FERPA for those types of screeners? I know ACSB 1 does. I get all of those sheets of paper every time there's a screener for any of my kids that are in the school district right now. I know that comes home, but is that something that isn't being achieved in other districts?
Mr. Chairman, to the best of my knowledge, districts are compliant with the federal law requirement. They risk the loss of federal funds through non-compliance. So this is an area that parents should be involved in, should be advised of, and school districts should be making sure those notifications are happening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, are you telling us the school boards are averse to providing a list of services to parents, and if so, why?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Simons, that's not what I said at all. I just wanted to share additional information regarding what federal law provided based on questions previously asked.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farmer, does the federal law cover providing mental health services and notifying the parents that your child is talking to a counselor about transitioning from one gender to another, or they're having mental health issues at school? Does it cover that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, I would say that I'm not an expert in this area of federal law. It's something that I have some familiarity with. So I think that when you get to counseling services, that is generally not an area that is under the Pupil Protection Act. As I mentioned before, that is really surveys and physical examinations or screenings. So physical health of the student, and then survey information and survey data. So the Pupil Protection Act does not get into mental health. FERPA itself, the Federal Privacy Rights Act, does speak generally with regard to the creation of student records. And so to the degree that that counseling service creates that record, then the parent would have access to that record. But whether or not there would be services or notification of services required under federal law, I would say probably not.
So then the obvious follow-up would be, we have a loophole that we need to close, and that's the intent of this bill. And wouldn't you agree that something needs to be done to address this, one way or the other? Because right now, the reason why this bill's before us is because we are having issues with this very issue. So does the School Board Association understand that and support what we're doing?
Mr. Chairman, the School Boards Association doesn't take a for or against position with regard to this bill. There were a couple of areas of operational concern that Dr. Brown shared. And so those were concerns that, should the legislation pass, we want to be sure that we're able to faithfully implement the legislation as directed by the legislature. But we don't take a position either in favor nor against this piece of legislation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
What's
Chairman.
me next? Anybody? Anybody? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Get it on? Okay, I got it. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senators. My name is Patricia McCoy. I'm a mother of 4 in Laramie County since 2007. It is an honor to speak before you today on this bill. I am in favor and support of this bill in a whole, but there are definitely things missing from this bill. So if I might make a few suggestions, while I was reading through all of it, I noticed that there are no penalties. There's no punishment if this law gets violated. Like if someone goes against this law and it gets passed, what are the consequences of that? I noticed that it does reference another state statute, but that statute also is very vague and simply refers us to the Supreme Court. But again, there's no consequences listed if this is violated. I can tell you right now from personal experience that I fought for the new library policy because the opt-out forms are being ignored. I fill them out every year, I turn them into the school, and then I also send an email to the school's principals so that I know not only did I submit it to the schools, but the principals also have a copy of it on file. And yet last year and this year, even though the very first line of my child's opt-out form states, no one is to speak to him without my prior authorization, he had a totally different counselor than I was told he would have. And that counselor spoke to him 6 times last year before I received notification that he was my son's counselor. What did they speak about? I don't know. No notification was given to me that they even had a conversation. This year, I made it very clear I wanted to know who his counselor would be and who he would be speaking with throughout the year for help. Again, I was told he would have a certain counselor, and guess what? He did not have that counselor this year until I found out he had another counselor who had spoken with him 4 times this year prior to my knowledge. And the only reason I found out that he didn't have the counselor was because I was in there for a meeting about his English curriculum that they were about to be doing. And I wanted to have a discussion with the teacher, and he was coming from the counselor's office, from a totally different counselor. As his mother, I made it very clear, black and white writing, do not speak to my child until you let me know why. Now we have 10 instances in 2 years where just the counselor spoke to him. Who knows who else in administration spoke to him without my knowledge last year or this year? I don't know. I can't tell you that because they don't give me that. I took a month and a half of this year trying to get his school curriculum for his classes. A month and a half of education he received that I had no access to, begging to get his school curriculum so that I could even review it. I understand at the high school level, they are very, very busy. I get that. But if I put in a request for information, I expect to get it back in a timely manner. When I go to work, I have deadlines that I have to meet. I have guidelines that I have to follow. But every single guideline that I'm trying to do my job as a parent to follow on my end is not being followed by the schools or the district. We just passed that library law, and now we have all these things happening. It's crazy to me that we don't have the punishments in there to go with this bill. It's a great bill. It is. I love that you are looking out for our rights, as you should. We are the parents. We are the ones in charge of our children's education, not the district, not the teachers, not the schools. But I feel like our hands are tied. What do we do? How do we get this information if it's not being given to us? What are our counters to this? If they break this, yeah, we can go to the Supreme Court, but there's no statute to say what punishments could possibly come from this. I'm not saying it has to be, this is exactly what's going to happen, but there's transportation bills out there that say you could get a fine, or you could get jail time, or you could receive this. There's nothing like that in this bill to make us feel like, yeah, we really do have a leg to stand on here. We really know something will be done if we have to go this route. And with that, I will take any questions that you have for me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Testimony. Anybody else? Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tyler Lindholm. I represent Americans for Prosperity here in the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Americans for Prosperity believes that parents have the fundamental right to direct their child's education. And we believe that this piece of legislation solidifies that fact in Wyoming law, and that's why we're supporting this legislation. We thank you as the Education Interim Committee, the work you did with your House members to get us to this point. I know it's been a long, drawn-out process, and there's been a lot of debate about it, but I think you've got a pretty good product when you look at the legislation. I did want to bring up the specific issue surrounding Band-Aids or something that happens. I don't think we need to actually delve into B in the legislation as was cited. I think AI actually solidifies it right at the very beginning of the legislation. And I'll cite that. It says under AI, notify a student's parent as soon as practicable, right? If there's a change in the student's physical, mental, or emotional health or well-being. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I think that actually goes down the road of where we're actually at with public schools. They do a great job. I'm not here to drag down on public schools. I'm a product of Wyoming public schools. My children are products of Wyoming public schools. My father was a product of Wyoming public schools, and my grandfather, and on down the line. I'm the 5th generation here in the state of Wyoming. And the way it happens now, because I have several children that constantly go to the nurse to make up something. They've got a stomach ache. They just really don't want to be there, for whatever reason it is that during that day. And they'll make up something, and the nurse calls me. And thankfully, I live in small town Wyoming, so the nurse is a family friend, and she'll call me and say, Tyler, Paul's in my office again, and he's got a tummy ache, and I'm pretty certain it's made up. And I said, can I talk to Paul? And that's how it happens in Wyoming. Thankfully, we live in Wyoming. So I don't think this legislation is a drag on the public schools here in the state of Wyoming, but I do think it is to support the parents that do have some concerns that maybe their voices aren't being heard when communicating with their schools. Thankfully, I live in Sundance, and that's not really an issue. But differences throughout the state may exist, and I think this legislation just solidifies that and helps that communication between public schools and their parents. I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
And Rufus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lindholm, on that last point, I mean, I understand supporting the concept that was described, but I guess I wonder what specifically in this legislation makes the situation better. And that's because we have federal law, we have, as you note, a lot of good communication taking place. And the policies, for me, as a parent of four also, they seem to work pretty well, just as you described, and that's generally how my life goes also. You get the phone call and you're like, really? Let's hear about this. So why do we need this? And specifically in here, what is in here that makes it better for the parents, the teachers, the students of Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, and Senator Rothfuss's question, it's a solid point. It was actually something I was thinking back when I was sitting back over there. It depends with the federal government, right? I mean, as we've seen over the last 8 years, things change drastically at the federal level. And to be honest, Mr. Chairman, I trust you. I don't trust the federal government at all. So the fact that we can have that in Wyoming law and just have a lean back gives me some comfort as a Wyoming parent and also as the representative for Americans for Prosperity.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate that, and certainly don't like to rely on the federal government either, but at the same time, when you look at the details that are in FERPA about what is and isn't covered, it does, for example, think, all right, well, we want to make sure that the injured child on the playground is not held back. And B provision seems as written to do that. So while the spirit here might match what the federal spirit is, the language here does not seem to match that federal language. And I guess I wonder if you share my concern in the fact that maybe we need to clean that language up to the point where, when a child falls and is injured on the playground, that while they'll try and call the parent as quickly as possible, somebody is always able to say, all right, well, let's help this child.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm a fan of belt and suspenders. So if there is a concern that can allay any fears that we might get over our skis, clarification is always a good thing. I'm always here to see legislation being worked. Super appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Oh, you got a question. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former representative, good to see you, my friend. You have experience, and you were a very effective legislator when you were in this building on the other side. The previous woman that testified brought up a great point. We removed all the teeth out of this bill. I went back and while she was speaking, I looked back at Senate File 117, and there was a paragraph E in that bill that spelled out the process for the school district to adopt procedures and a complaint process and what happens, and even a cause of action if it wasn't followed. Now we're left with no teeth. Does this bill do anything? Or can the schools just flat ignore it and say, catch me if you can, and sue us if you can? What kind of teeth are there in this bill as it is, and what would you recommend us doing to fix that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Chairman, in regards to the teeth in legislation, that was something that I was thinking about during the prior testimony also. And when it comes to teeth, I guess you have to weigh it out. What does this look like on the ground floor for our teachers here in the state of Wyoming? You're a border state, or border area also that you represent, Mr. Chairman. So I suspect you deal with the same situation that I deal with, and that's that ebb and flow of teachers going back and forth across the border, depending on where they can actually make the best living. And certainly I can't blame them. I like to make money also, and I like to be paid a fair wage. And so one of the concerns that I would have is if we put in something that's a little too heavy-handed, directed from the legislature, I would be concerned that we might lose some teachers over that. However, I do think direction from the legislature stating something along the lines that these policies must be updated and in place, along with some maybe some character around it, to set up something that defines a standard by which you would feel comfortable, Mr. Chairman, as the legislature, I think would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Seeing nothing else, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, you're first and he's second.
Sorry if I seem a little out of breath. I actually wasn't going to come today and was listening online and had a few things pop into my head, so I thought I'd drive down here safely, as quickly as I could. Kathy Sigliano. I am a resident here in Laramie County. So just based off of some of the things that I heard previously when I was at home, common sense was mentioned. We heard Ms. Farmer give testimony, just kind of, I felt the same way that Senator Beitman did, that it felt a little extreme and in the weeds. I think that we have seen several incidences of schools not adhering to this policy. I think it could be stronger, as just mentioned. I'm supporting it because I think we do need something on the books, and then hopefully someone can add a little bit more teeth to it later. My gosh, I'm out of shape. I had so many thoughts going through my head, but kind of off cuff, and maybe slightly not too much on the same realms as this bill, but just recently, 2 days ago, we were, some of us moms here were shown a flyer that was put up at a school here locally at South High, talking about banned books and a club that they could join, and at 7 a.m. come to this class. So we do see where teachers and admin are not talking to parents about things and just inviting students to come on their own will to do things, along with, yes, along with some of the mental health that I think Senator Beitman mentioned. I believe there was a case up in Rock Springs on a child who the school was willfully giving that child and helping her transition, giving her a burner phone to talk to them. Those are things I don't think schools want to, be implemented in, or, have things going on where they're now going to be in a court case with parents. I would hope that most of our schools and districts and teachers are wanting to work with parents, and parents are wanting to work with the teachers in the schools. We don't want to have this break in a bridge that people are constantly having to, find a different route to. So I do support it. Hopefully it can be stronger later in the future. I did have a lot of thoughts, but they've all escaped me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You're next.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senators. My name is Richard Lennox, a small business manager and owner, but I was a teacher and educator for 23 years. Just listening to everybody, I wanted the teacher voice to be able to come out today. I worked extensively in the high school on the student teacher parent handbook. I ran the senior parent meeting. I worked with parents from A to Z, from top to bottom in all my years. And it was relationships that I cultivated and tried to build that trust that was mentioned. And I think that's the problem. there is no trust right now between the community and what's going on in schools. And I'm just wondering if this bill is the appropriate venue to bring that trust together, because it's a community issue. And if the parents that spoke eloquently here this morning spoke to, is this bill going to actually trickle down to the community and to those teachers and those relationships every day with their students? Or is it just going to be language in a green book? I really, you wanted me to be blunt, and I really just think it's just going to be legalese language, and the venue to bring those relationships and that trust back needs to happen at the local level with school boards, in the schools, with the parents and the teachers. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to come from, with all due respect, senators at the state level. So I'll stand for questions.
Just a quick, and thank you for your testimony, bringing that teacher point of view. We appreciate that for sure. I would just point you to the paragraph A, each school district shall, that's what this bill's about, is giving the school boards some direction as to what we expect from the legislature and letting the school boards develop policies based on this. And this is broadly written for a purpose to give them leeway. But we're just telling what the bare minimum is. And the bare minimum is parents need to be informed. They need to be in the loop. And they need to be able to opt in or opt out, whatever we decide that language is going to look like for some of these health services, mental health services. That's it. That's what we want, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. So you're right, it does happen at the local school board level, but this just provides them the bare minimum framework that we expect from the legislature and our constituents are demanding of us. So just wanted to offer that clarity. Thank you.
Chairman Scott, if I can respond to that, is that okay? Senator Beitman, as an educator, I would hope I was in the forefront there. So the school board, they have people like me in the schools who know how to put those meetings together, know how to get the information out to the parents, how to discuss sensitive issues, how to deal with discipline and attendance issues and all those things. We do that on a daily basis. So what I hear is it's information that's already available from professionals in the district, but we're not going to look toward the professionals. We're going to look to the state legislators to give us direction when we already have the information and we already have the direction within our systems at the school.
So one of the questions I have, Mr. Lennox, is related to, as a teacher, you mentioned that you were working in this space pretty extensively and communications. And I wanted to hear a little bit about how much time that takes, how much of your day that communication takes. And can you provide a little context there of the challenges associated with this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that was, parent communication was my specialty as a teacher in the classroom and outside the classroom. I started in elementary. I was making home visits daily. I would meet parents anywhere they needed to be met. A lot of parents in the school district I taught in, they were uncomfortable coming to the school, so I went to their home. I would have my own back to school nights. So the school has a back to school night. I would have my own back to school night to share with my parents, this is what my classroom looks like. This is what we do in here. So, I'm nervous, just, I'm it's emotional because that's what I did. I mean, if there's any teachers out there or districts that want to know, how do you outreach to the parents? let me know, because that's what I did. And it was very important to me to have those relationships with the parent. I got to the point where the parents were like, Mr. Langs, you got it. We trust you. And that's why I wanted to bring up the word trust. We've got to build that trust. And I think that happens within the districts at the local level.
Yeah, and on that trust situation, I think that's what's really important also. And one of the other aspects, I think, of parents' choice, which this is reflecting on when things are going wrong and somebody is mad, and creates, in my view, a lot of extra work and challenge for those that are happy with the system and when things are going good. And I think it's hard to balance those requirements from the state, because the objective that I have, trusting my teachers, getting to know my teachers, communicating with my teachers for my kids, I want to ensure that they feel comfortable with that trust and that they are focused on educating my kids rather than spending their time, honestly, responding to me, because you're doing one or the other. And if you're talking to me, you're not teaching my kids, so to speak. And I'm not saying that both aren't important, but there's that balance. So can you comment on that balance a little bit? What are your thoughts on the impacts or the implications of having that trust rather than just setting up a rigorous system?
If I can have some leeway, Chairman Scott. Okay, briefly. Briefly, we had a situation where a student, there was a discipline issue. Parents went to the news. It became a legal big hoopla, okay? The parents came. I did not know who the parents were, so they came into my office, and immediately within 2 seconds, I realized, oh, these are the parents that have been in the news that are having an issue. I talked to them because my professionalism told me, have the conversation with them, give them the information that I have. Well, the system was very upset with me because they were so worried about all the legalities of, well, what did you say to them? You spoke to them. What is this going to mean? And so there is this fight between the professionals trying to do the right thing and then legislation saying, well, you shouldn't do this, or you can do this, or what's going to happen here. And that is in the thoughts of many professionals in education today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? We're starting to get in time trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. I'll keep my remarks brief. My name is Nathan Winters. I'm president of the Wyoming Family Alliance. I just wanted to commend the hard work of the committee through the interim in developing this parental rights and education bill. I understand the nature of how this came to be. It's trying to fix a specific hole that has been seen in statute. And I think that obviously last year we were also in support of the original bill. This is slightly different, but I understand the nature of how you need to get something on the books to at least provide guidelines, which is really what this does. It helps a school district, and often school districts, we do find that when they have clear direction, they do a great job of implementing good law. And that's what I think this is. I think this is a win-win for all sides. And I just want to stand in thanks for your hard work on this bill, on and support the bill.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, that will close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Second.
Moved. We don't need a second here. Amendments. We had a couple of amendments suggested by the state superintendent. I'm looking at them. The one on page 2, lines 7 and 8, says as soon as practicable, if there is a change, the suggestion was put a specific timeline in there. The trouble with that is changes are gradual and it's hard to get a start time, so I'm not sure that one works. But the one at the bottom, provide access within a reasonable time, the suggestion was to add, but no later than 10 days, and I would guess it would be calendar days of the request. Is that something we ought to do?
Mr. Chairman.
Under office.
Discussion on that. I think in a general operating school environment, so imagine that you're in the month of February or something, that probably works just fine. But a 10-day calendar day window is not equal all throughout the school year in terms of when anyone would be responsive to a records request. So I don't know that that works without a lot of additional context. It could be 10 school days, but that also wouldn't be sufficient because now when you're looking at the summer, you'd never get it. I don't know quite what the solution is. I think the intent's reasonable.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think, again, like I said previously, we're giving direction to the school districts of what we want as the bare minimum here, and hopefully they will take this and go above and beyond and prescribe a time frame that they see fit and be able to work it to what works best for their district. I think if we start implementing these time frames and getting into the weeds on definitions of first aid and 10 days, 20 days, school days, business days, months, that's work that they could be doing, that we're just as a legislator providing the framework for what we ask. And I think that less is more in this case. That's just my opinion.
Okay. You think we don't need an amendment here?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Office.
Briefly on that first page, on Romanet 1, lines 11 through 17, beginning at the period, procedures adopted under this paragraph, et cetera. That's basically the equivalent of legislative findings. It does nothing in law, but it's sort of monologuing. So I would move to strike that. It doesn't actually do anything, and the more is less concept, I don't think it's necessary for us to provide that. So move to strike after the period on line 11, lines 11 through 17, page 2. There's no policy in there.
Okay, that's moved. Discussion. Senator Whiteman.
Mr. Chairman, I would disagree. I think that does reinforce our position, and that we're telling the school districts that procedures adopted under this paragraph shall reinforce the fundamental right of parents and guardians to make decisions. That's the whole point of the bill. And what we're telling school districts is you need to adhere to parental rights, and here's the framework we're giving you to accomplish that. So I would leave it in.
Okay. We've heard the arguments. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. That amendment failed. Further amendments.
Mr. Chairman, page 2 or 3,
Page 3.
paragraph B,
Paragraph B,
line 21.
line 21.
Because right now we have an opt-out provision. I would change it to an opt-in, and to accomplish that, after the word to, after guardian, strike withhold consent or decline any specific, and then add the words opt-in for. So it would read, provide the option for the parent or guardian to opt in for healthcare services.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. On and against the motion, we discussed this in the interim, and this was a big point of contention about the additional workload and the idea that you would have to opt in. The opt-in rate is a bit challenging, and honestly, most parents want these things. Most do. Most want all of them. But you definitely have parents that don't want some of them. And the idea that all parents, I have to go through the entire list to check every one of them, to default to standard of care, for example, for my students, when at that point somebody forgets to file, they don't have it. in the forget to file side of things, if somebody is really upset about having their kid screened, for example, for lice, they'll remember at a much higher rate than those that wouldn't. And again, that was the discussion at the committee meeting. I think this is probably the most important change in the bill, is whether it's opt-in or opt-out. All of the management concerns about implementing this that we heard are probably at least plausible if it's this type of consent or decline situation. But if it goes to opt-in, then I don't know how the districts would manage it and how it would be effective. So I think that's a very damaging choice for the bill.
Okay. Whitman.
Just to respond to that, Mr. Chairman, I would say, you know, I envision this to look like you have first aid services. We know what first aid is, cuts, bruises, things of that nature. Emergency services, obviously that's without question. If you're a trained healthcare professional, you have a duty to act to save a person's life. You don't have to worry about legal consequences, you just act. As a first responder, I have to provide care up to my level of training, period, to save a life, no matter if I'm on duty, off duty, whatever. Same goes for in a school setting. So that whole argument's moot. Then you get into the mental health services. Check the box if you want that. If you don't want it, say I don't want it. So we're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I think we can just have the school districts provide a list of what they offer. Parents have the option to opt into what they prefer, and away we go. That's the amendment.
Okay. I will say on this one, I think that perhaps the opt-out is going to work better as a practical matter, because I think what this is really aimed at is allowing parents to get out of some things they don't want. I think that will be the one that's going to be administratively the one that works. So. Okay, we've heard the arguments. Further discussion. All those in favor of the opt-in amendment, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say no.
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 Aye.
So I have 3 ayes, 2 noes. Okay. Anything else?
I have an amendment.
Senator Stein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is to take the bill a little bit back toward 117 from last year. It would be on page 2, line 7, Romanet I, and the sentence would read, notify a student's parent or guardian as soon as practicable. Oh, I decided not to change that one, sorry. So we'll go down to line 8 and insert after the word in, services or monitoring related to, and then it would read the student's physical, mental, or emotional health or well-being, period. And delete and in that line, the balance of line 10, and then environment for the student in line 11. So it would read, now notify the student's parent or guardian as soon as practicable if there is a change in the student's services or monitoring related to the student's physical, mental, or emotional health or well-being, period. And Mr. Chairman, the reason being, I don't know that we need to have the rest of that. I think it's just excess that we don't need in this bill.
Okay, see, but you're not taking out the rest of the paragraph.
No, just to the period after student on line 11.
Okay. So what you're asking for is a notification if there's a change in the services the student is getting, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, understand that? Senator Ruffus?
Just a question on that. Based on the construct that would imply that it doesn't matter if the student's physical, mental, emotional health or well-being changes. It only matters if the monitoring of the student's physical, mental, or emotional health or well-being changes. And that seems actually contrary. I don't like the bill, but I don't think the folks that like the bill would want that change.
Well, tell me what you mean, because I'm just trying to take out the whole safe and supportive learning environment because of the fact that that is connected to CDC laws that are related to sex education.
May I?
Yes, go ahead.
I think,
Brennan.
I think we can leave 7, 8, and 9 up until the and just strike and the school's ability to provide a safe and supportive learning environment for the students. I think we can just strike that. And then I think it does.
All right, I'll take that as a friendly amendment to my amendment.
Okay, so the amendment would read, the thing with the new amendment, notify students, parents, guardians, as soon as practical, if there's change in the student's physical, mental, or emotional health and well-being, period. Is that the way it would read? Okay, discussion on the revised amendment. None, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. Any further?
For discussion's sake on the issue of how we removed out of 117, the ability to obtain a declaratory judgment if the district has violated this section and to seek injunctive relief, that's no longer in here. We have on page 6, paragraph 6, they may seek judicial review pursuant to Wyoming statute 16.3114, which if anybody knows what that is, please let me know, within 30 calendar days, and that's basically where we're at. It does lay out some sort of a complaint process, but at the end of the day, what we're left with is paragraph 6. Is that, I'm asking the committee, is that enough?
I think that's the administrative practice. I think that's pretty standard.
Okay.
So that does give you judicial remedy, a standard procedure for doing it.
Mr. Chairman, does it provide an injunctive relief option? So if they are violating the statute, they stop and then we sort it out?
That's
Okay.
my understanding.
Okay.
I want to check that out. That's my understanding.
Okay, then I'll withhold my amendment for that,
Okay.
for the time being.
Seeing nothing else, I'm going to suggest to the committee that at the end of B that starts on page 3 and finishes on page 4, we add a provision that says nothing in this section shall be construed as preventing school personnel from rendering first aid to a student or summoning emergency responders in case of sudden need. And that's just a precaution. I think we're probably all right without it, but you put that in, then somebody will say, gee, I can't use common sense. I think that's a useful precaution. So I'll move that. Discussion?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Not carried. Further? Anything further? Discussion on the bill? Do I hear a motion?
Call the question.
Okay, motion is due pass and call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, on Senate File 9, Parental Rights in Education 1, do pass as amended. Senator Beitman?
Aye.
Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
No.
Senator Steinmetz?
Aye.
Chairman Scott?
Aye.
4 aye, 1 no.
Okay? That one's carried. The next bill for our consideration, and I doubt we'll be able to complete it, is developmental preschool funding. It's a joint interim bill. It's here for a couple of reasons. It has a large appropriation in it. We'll probably fight the appropriation out, I suspect, in the course of the budget rather than here. So that's kind of just belt and suspenders, and I suspect the Appropriations Committee will simply remove it when we re-refer it. And then we have modifications to the formula that's there. We're shifting from the count on the students receiving services from December to May. We had considerable testimony on that, the Joint Interim Committee. And then we're updating the figure, which has gotten out of date, on page 3 in terms of how much per student it is. We're updating it to be consistent with the proposed appropriation. And then I have an amendment that developed to make sure that this works so that we actually distribute the appropriation that's granted. That's the bill. Invite any public testimony on the bill.
Good morning, Chairman Scott and members of the committee. My name is Tricia Wynot, and I am the Executive Director of Stride Learning Center Region 12 here in Laramie County. I have spoken to you before on many occasions. 10 months ago, we started this process. And first and foremost, I would like to thank you so much on behalf of our families and my staff and my board of directors for the draft and the work that the Joint Education Committee has done to move forward in helping sustain the child development centers. It is remarkable that so much work was done in such a short time, and I'm very appreciative and thankful for Wyoming Department of Education and Wyoming Department of Health and all those folks in our community that have really rallied to help support this. The importance of a higher per child amount could not be more necessary than ever before. Our $8,600 per child just falls short. I have one quick example of what's currently happening now in my center. We have a child who lives 51 miles away from our center. And this child has a lot of needs, a lot of serious needs, and the parents have no transportation. So this little child, we drive out 51 miles to pick him up, drive this child back. We have a great preschool day, gets all the special ed services, drive the child back, and then the bus driver and the aide return. So it's 200 miles a day for this child. And we're tickled that the child can be with us and learn and grow. And that's what we're there for. And that's what the child is entitled to. That being said, at 67 cents a federal mile, that's what the federal amount is for mileage. And the hourly wage for the bus driver and the hourly wage for the bus aide and their small, modest benefit packet that we offer at Stride. For 175 days of school, it will cost $71,000 to transport this little person. And that's before we get into general ed and before we get into special ed. So again, I just thank you for the serious consideration that you all have given in knowing that the statewide child development centers are in crisis. Stride is in crisis. And the increase in the per child amount is everything to us. And I greatly appreciate it. The May 1st child count is brilliant. That should have been done maybe 30 years ago, but better late than never. So I thank you for that, and I stand for any questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We've been getting a lot of emails about this bill, and I think there's some confusion as to what this bill does and who we're offering these services to. Is my understanding that a lot of this goes to children with developmental problems, like severely disabled kids and kids with learning disabilities. Can you, because you're an expert in this area and you live in this every day, but explain to the people listening the types of kids that you see and what this money is going to be used for.
Chairman Scott, Senator Beitman, thank you for that question. I'm so glad you asked. It goes to children that have a very wide range of what we call an individual education plan, IEP, needs. So it can be everything from a child with Down syndrome, a child with autism, a child with CP, or it could be a little one that is a fragile diabetic and needs the care of a nurse. Listening to the previous bill, all of the medical things that school nurses in the K-12 program deal with, we also deal with in our little preschool program for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So we have children that maybe are trach dependent and other things. So we have everything from medical needs to cognitive needs and everything in between. Not all children have severe needs, but it can range. They all have an educational component that has been identified by Chapter 7, which are the Wyoming Department of Education eligibility criteria for ages 3 to 21. So we fall under that same umbrella. These are children with special ed needs that also have to receive their education in a general ed environment or in at least the least restrictive environment. Sometimes they're with peers, most often. There's a handful that that's not their least restrictive environment. They need a more segregated class. Some children receive speech only. It's a wide variety, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Understand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I was just wondering, I just want to make sure, I think I'm reading it right. This is staying under the Department of Health, and you're advocating for that to stay in the Department of Health, not go to the K-12 system?
Senator Chairman Scott, Senator Steinmetzer, that's interesting you bring it up because this really has nothing to do with the governance piece. This is just the funding piece. That being said, you are absolutely entitled to a straight answer from me. I would love to see someday the governance piece moved over to Department of Ed, but this bill doesn't do that. Department of Health is a great leadership, and the people at Department of Health work very hard for us. The Early Intervention Education Program, a group of 4 people really run the whole district, which is what we are. We're the last district in the state of Wyoming. All of that being said, Wyoming Department of Ed still governs and monitors Department of Health and all the CDCs. We're education. Someday it would make great sense to be under the Department of Ed. But for now, the governance piece isn't our immediate worry. Immediate worry is the funding crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I do think the Department of Health is here, and we got time problems, so I'm going to hold you a little later and make sure we can get the public testimony if we can. So Anybody else?
Yes.
Yes,
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senators. My name is Taisha Hone, and I currently work at Stride Learning Center as a speech-language pathology assistant. My husband and I have called Cheyenne, Wyoming home since 2010 when we moved here with our 2 young kids, who are now freshmen at the University of Wyoming in Laramie and a sophomore at East High School right here in Cheyenne. I am here today to ask for equitable funding for child development centers, CDCs, in Wyoming. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, was passed in 1975. The passage of IDEA meant children with disabilities could no longer be turned away from school and required that they have available to them a free and appropriate education, which emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs. Currently, in the state of Wyoming, a 5-year-old child getting special education services receives approximately half the funding a 6-year-old child receives due to the funding distribution in our state. How can this be, you ask? It is because a 6-year-old can no longer be served by a CDC, but rather by Wyoming's public school system, and funding provided to our public schools for this same child is double what a CDC gets. Again, I'm here today to ask for equitable funding. A 5-year-old receiving services under the IDEA umbrella deserves the very same funding as a 6-year-old. The CDCs in the state of Wyoming provide special education and related services to many children who come from families of varied socioeconomic status. The CDCs are not a charity. Under IDEA, we are required to provide special education and related services to children with disabilities. We serve children who are on IEPs, individual education plans, wherever they attend preschool, and some of the CDCs also provide high-quality preschools. Research shows the return on investment for early childhood education suggests tremendous value, ranging from $4 to $13 for every $1 spent, from impacts on education attainment, employment, health, truancy, and criminality. Please know it is a challenge to continue to provide high-quality services to all children who receive these services who qualify under IDEA. In the past few years, I've had coworkers leave the CDC for better paying jobs with healthier benefits at the school district and elsewhere. Early childhood educators, please listen to this, have low salaries, a lack of recognition and value. Yet we have a demanding and immensely important and rewarding career. Those of us who remain in the field are passionate about the kids and families we serve. We serve the best kids at the CDCs. I can tell you from firsthand experience that these 3, 4, and 5-year-olds are determined. They're kind. These kids are ambitious, adventurous. They are logical. Senators, Mr. Chairman, these kids are resilient. They're artistic. And some of them come into this world with some real challenges. Mr. Chairman, senators, help them. Help their families. Let us help them and their families. It is the right thing to do for the state of Wyoming. In closing, a quote from a longtime professional educator, Rita Wilson: "Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists they become the best they can possibly be." Mr. Chairman, senators, please support the preschoolers of Wyoming. Give them the equitable funding they so deserve. Be generous. Join me, join Tricia in being their champions. Please use your given power to act on behalf of your youngest and most vulnerable constituents. Thank you for your time and support. I also want to thank State Superintendent for her support of increasing our funding. And yeah, thank you. If I
Okay,
could, oh,
thank you.
sorry, if I could say one more thing, I just wanted to share, you know, earlier when educators were talking about communication is tricky. It takes up time. I want to add, my caseload as an SLPA is the highest it's ever been. We're short on species right now at Stride. We're actually using some teletherapy because we're short-staffed. But I just want to share a little bit of an email I got from a mom, if I could. 2 seconds. We need to move on. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman,
I know we've got people online.
Okay, yep, it's just Alicia Roan today.
Just Alicia Roan. Okay, we'll get to her.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, nice to see you all. I'm Andy Schwartz. I represent the Child Development System. I don't think I can do any better than the representatives of Stride, but I will point out my family and my daughter were beneficiaries of the services provided by Child Development Centers, and it was critical, and I can't say how much we appreciated it and how successful my daughter is now in life. But I am really here to comment on the chairman's reference to the appropriation. And I have been in conversation with members of the Appropriations Committee because in the budget, there is a governor's recommendation for an ECA, which is part of the statute. And in light of the changes that this bill might provide for that budget, is particularly the change in the count date in May, there are numbers being prepared to make sure that what is currently in the budget can be adjusted to represent what's in this bill. And I'll keep it at that and stand for any questions.
Understandings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you remind us the number that's currently in the budget?
The ECA was roughly 12 million. The original request from the Department of the Health was roughly 16 million.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's get Alicia Roan online.
All right, Ms. Roan, whenever you're ready, you can turn on your mic and your camera.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman Scott. Sorry I couldn't be at the committee meeting in person this morning. I got wind of it late last night, but I wanted to voice my opinion in favor of Senate File 19. And I echo Tricia's words and say thank you for drafting this bill. I think we drafted it, as a safety net in case that external cost adjustment did not go through. But I just want to compare the two for you. So we went in to the external cost adjustment with a request of $16 million and came out with $12 million. If you take that amount and divide it by 2 years, that's $6 million per year divided by 14 regions, or equivalent to, we serve about 3,443 children in the state right now, birth to 5. So that would be an increase of $1,742 per child compared to the $12,000 in this bill per child that would change in state statute. So don't get me wrong, we definitely appreciate the ECA, but originally we came up with that $6 million and the $12,000 per child amount because that's what Jackson needed to stay viable, obviously for the cost of living in Jackson and serving those children. And we came up with that $12,000 as well because of doing a long extended study with Elliot Regenstein on determining what amount the CDCs need to stay viable. Again, we have 3 CDCs around the state that could potentially close if we don't increase the funding. Additionally, with this bill, it would move the child count date from December to May 1st, which is huge for us because that gives us the full fiscal year to pick up children and get funding for serving them. I can tell you that we had our December 1st count date, December 1st. And then in January, my center got 45 referrals on children, which we may or may not receive funding for if they don't stay on that December 1st count. So it definitely helps us in serving more children that we pick up throughout the fiscal year. So I guess I just kind of wanted to give you some hard details on that. We're thankful, obviously, for any increase to our per child amount, but at the same time, we can't just keep throwing pennies in what we're mandated to do in serving these children of the state. It's in our state statutes. And so when I see other bills going through that aren't in state statutes that we're throwing funds at before we're actually putting funds towards what we're mandated to fund in this state, and what we're mandated to fund are children birth to 5 with early intervention services. I also wanted to make the point that this has nothing to do with universal preschool. So please make sure to set that aside. One other thing, Chairman Scott, I wanted to comment on some of the statistics that you wanted. In a study by the Education Commission of the states found the cost benefit ratio and future savings of children getting early intervention services in K through 12 is $2,700 per child per year. Additionally, the early childhood programs reduce the likelihood that a child will need special education in 3rd grade by 39%. I think that's very telling. It's a huge cost savings in the long run to support early intervention. Thank you again. I'm in support of this bill and stand for any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. At this point, we've run out of time. We'll come back and it'll be the lead bill on Friday. We'll hear from the Department of Health. You can make it back then. And I presume the School Boards Association can as well. And you're with?
I'm the director of the Wyoming Women's Foundation. My name is Rebecca Hazelton, but I'm also coming with a parent perspective.
Okay, so can you make it on Friday as well?
Will it be the 8 a.m. meeting?
Yeah.
I will do my best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry the previous bill took longer than expected and we ran out of time. That happens. Okay, committee, we're adjourned. We'll revise the Friday meeting notice